Welcome to the Remote Nomad podcast. This is your weekly escape from the 9-to-5 grind. Every week, we interview industry experts from around the globe on remote work, landing a remote job, the digital nomad lifestyle, and mastering your mindset. Prepare to be inspired as you learn how to create a lifestyle with more freedom and flexibility. I'm your host and remote career coach, Kate Smith. Before we dive into today's episode, if you've been struggling with creating a resume for remote jobs, then make sure you download the free remote resume checklist. It's going to show you how to create a top-tier resume so you can transform it into an interview-generating machine. See the link in the show notes to download this free offer or head over to theremotenomad.com/free gift. Today's guest is on a mission to remove geographical borders by creating a global home country on the internet. And yes, you heard that right. He is the co-founder and CEO of SafetyWing, which is one of the most popular insurance providers for remote workers and remote teams. To date, the company has raised over $8 million and has served over 60,000 clients and growing. And now he's on a mission to build a global home country on the internet and global social safety net. I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest, Sondre Rasch. Sondre, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Great to be here, Kate.
I'm really excited to dive into this whole concept of this country on the internet and even what you mean with this whole global social safety net. So much has changed with remote work, the future of how we operate, and I guess you could say borders being dissolved. So why don't you share with us, I want to just dive right into it and have you share with us what you mean when you say creating a global home country on the internet and with this whole global social safety net. So for people that aren't familiar, what does all of this mean? Are they two separate things? Do they work in tandem? What do they look like?
Yes. So global social safety net is the first thing. And then it's like, who are we building that for? Well, it's for remote workers and digital nomads worldwide. But we also imagine that it will be for the first country on the internet that we want to contribute in bringing about. And what do we mean by each? Well, a global social safety net, that's the thing that, many countries have. We come from Norway. We're modeling it in a sense of the Norwegian style social safety net, but making that available for everyone, everywhere. And globally, digitally on the internet. And then the country, well, it's like, there you got to ask the question, what is a country? Well, it's a community that solves problems for its members, shared problems, maybe even public goods problems in particular. And there is, because of the internet, because we're living in this global society on the internet to a large degree already, many things that isn't being properly addressed by geographical countries. And some of those things are best done by global entities, not things that are geographically divided up. And that's, the project Plumia that we started is to figure out what are those issues that are best solved by an internet country instead of a geographical country, and how might we do them.
So what are some examples of some of the things that would be included in that?
Well, the two things we are pretty sure about is, the global social safety net being one. And then the other is probably passport, digital and analog identity. So there is already this need to have a proper identity on the internet and to cross geographical borders as you walk around planet Earth. And those two things, should be the same thing, and it should be, well functioning. And we many people live in countries where the passport is not very useful. Of course, some listeners here live in countries where the passport, it's just a practicality to travel to any country. But there is a significant, actually the majority of countries, you travel, that means you go into this arduous visa process, and the answer is often no. So the possibility that, you can develop this, people can have a secondary passport that, in addition to their geographical passport, that is potentially much more powerful and easy to use when traveling, that will certainly be part of it.
This is really exciting because this is a whole new idea. We have passports. Estonia had their e-residency, but still it's very tied to Estonia as a whole, where this is looking at the world and introducing a whole new thing. How do you foresee this panning out? You know, obviously there are countries, they have their passports. How do you foresee this panning out when we think of, you know, taxes and travel and dealing with other countries? Are other countries going to be on board or okay with this? How's that kind of, how do you see that panning out?
Well, so I do think that we are trying to solve a problem that is kind of already happening, but that countries aren't fully aware of is happening. Uh, and that is certainly happening to a big extent in the near future, which is that thing where we started the conversation, which is that in many practical senses, there is no borders, right? When you buy services on the internet, when we talk now, I don't even know where you are. Like we didn't, well, I mentioned it was California actually, but it's like we don't have to. You could be anywhere. And we can collaborate and we could work together and, you know, we could buy or sell services on the internet. And the thing is, that's all things that are very relevant for a country to deal with. So, and then you get into problems, which is this obsoleteness of countries, you know, and this is easy to see in the social safety net department. You know, I'm from Norway, great social safety net in Norway. When I'm abroad, no social safety net. Like that's the facts. And then the other thing is, you know, we're a remote company, you know, we have, you know, what, 50, 60 employees, 40 different countries. That company is technically, we have entities some different places, technically in the US. Are the people in the other 39 countries, they're getting no services from the US, obviously, right? So that's the practicalities of what we're talking about. It just isn't practical. And so what you see digital nomads do is, you know, they go abroad, depending on what the rules are in the home country, they're trying to figure out the taxes. It's a mess. They generally, it often becomes this like bordering up on voluntary. It's like, do they want to? And with internet companies, you see the same, where it's like, they can be registered somewhere, they can move where they're registered. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's like they can switch where they have their servers. Is that where they are? So for these two issues, like internet companies and digital nomads, which is just the early phase of what we're seeing, there is already this loosening up the relationship between them and their home country. And I think we are for those, we are a bit in Wild West territory, but we're heading into a much more Wild West territory soon. So you can imagine, I can definitely see it being possible on the horizon that a respectable company might like register on the blockchain or something. And a lot of people think that is like all good because, and I can see many benefits to it, but by that point, the sort of tax ability of countries really evaporates. So I think, you know, the country and the internet, what we're building, we're the peace offering. We're like, this is the peace solution. This is sort of like, yes, we need to make structures that work in the future, but we want to do that in a way where like this isn't like a catastrophe. And indeed, I think a country on the internet can then negotiate and have a friendly relationship with geographical countries so that you can figure out those things like taxation when for digital nomads who move through those countries, while at the same time making access and living there easy and relatively low cost. And I think that's a good negotiated agreement.
Yeah, this is so exciting. You know, when you mention the blockchain, I think of that as well in crypto and how that's moving things forward. And then you have what you're saying with this country on the internet, which is again bringing those identities online and whatnot. Do you feel is the goal? I know there's this the social safety net side of things. How is this going to impact the world? Like when we look at, okay, is it leveling the playing field? So you have developing countries that can now compete with developed countries. What is this? How is this going to change literally the world?
Yeah. I mean, what I think is about to unfold, and certainly will, as if we succeed with our mission, which I do think we will, and is essentially that a lot of young people these days, they grew up, and yes, like, you know, I just talked to Ines, and I was the general manager for Nomad Insurance in SafetyWing, and you know, when you hear her story, kind of like being from Algeria, but having this very international background, but she, in some ways, she's so alike to me, even though she has this, in theory, very different background. And why? It's because we're both children of the internet, right? So we, in a way, we have a shared reference that is actually very big. And you know, my grandparents and her are probably very different, but we are not that different. So, and that's sort of one thing I think is happening, is that the generation growing up is growing up on the internet, and the internet is almost like this big city or something like that, where everything is connected to everything else. And yeah, it does equalize opportunities to a massive degree, and that is, you know, the mission statement of SafetyWing. We want to, you know, contribute to equal opportunity and freedom for everyone, because the internet is equalizing opportunity by giving more job opportunities. Like if you grow up in a developing country, you can get a job on the internet, which is much better paid. Okay, that's a straightforward one. Or you can have an international audience for your YouTube channel or something, but you still don't have equal opportunity when it comes to the social safety net. And that's what we hope to equalize. And freedom, well, that's freedom to move, right? It's also freedom when you have the social security, that you have that safety to fall back on. There's also the positive freedom that comes from that, of like not having to be concerned with your basic needs. So that's what we want to make it. We want to make it a great equalizer that allows people who otherwise would have few opportunities to have much more freedom as well.
This is huge. And so what inspired this? This is a big undertaking. What is it, just seeing the model again in Norway and saying, oh, this should be everywhere? What inspired it?
Well, I think you know, it is probably relevant that, you know, as you know, teenager, I was growing up on the internet in the early internet days, and I worked on using like IRC and cooperated on website projects with young people from different countries. So I have been living, and many other people as well, have been living in this world for a long time. And then, you know, came this thing where, you know, I worked as a policy advisor for the government of Norway. So I knew about how to make a social safety net. But secondly, my previous company was a freelancer platform called Superside, and we wanted to provide benefits for the freelancers, like health insurance and income protection. And then we discovered that didn't exist. And that was like the aha moment, where it was like, oh, because we had to figure out like, why didn't it exist? Well, it's because we can technically buy it, but in one country. And that is in this very old-fashioned way. Like we hoped we could buy this global thing where it was like bought an API and it was flexible, like a modern product, but that just didn't exist. And then, of course, when you look into that, you start to see that, oh, this is like, why doesn't it exist? It's because all this infrastructure is built around the entire economy being local, national, and it has to be remade. So that was sort of like the problem discovery moment, was just having the problem myself. And of course, I'm also digital nomad, so I had the problem as an individual, and it's a remote company. So I had the problems myself, saw them up close, and I understood why we couldn't. And then because I had some idea about how to build it, after a year of trying to get someone else to start this company, we figured out, actually, I don't think anyone else is going to do this, so we have to do it ourselves.
That's awesome. And I love, you know, especially for the digital nomads, we've always operated in such a gray area. And with this, it puts into black and white sort of like how you can approach it. And we have these complex challenges, like you say, with remote teams, remote workers. You can be registered in a company doesn't mean you're based there. And how does that all look? And it seems like this brings that all together. How far along in the process are you with getting this, not just started, but how far along are you in this process of making this our next reality?
Yeah. So currently where we're at, we started with Nomad Insurance. And I should say, when we first started out, we had broadly the exact same ideas we still have. Like 3 years ago, we had the same idea about what we needed to build. And we understood, like we do in this conversation, that this is a big undertaking. And so how are we going to split it up? And the decision that we made was, we'll make like one product at a time, and each of them has to work on their own. And while doing that, we'll kind of learn, and then we'll kind of sew together to a cohesive membership at the end. That was sort of our way of approaching that. And then like the decision on where to start ended up at Nomad Insurance, because there was already this infrastructure in place for travel medical that was global, where we saw here we can use a lot of the infrastructure to make the Nomad product, which was, of course, a segment we knew very well, and which is an early adopter. It's like an innovator segment as well. A lot of the things that Digital Nomad does, everyone else does later. So it made sense to start there. And so we started in 2018 with Nomad Insurance, and that's been going really well. And then we worked on the health insurance, meanwhile, which was done last March, where we had this full health insurance and also for teams. And then the next on the roadmap is, for this year, we have remote doctor, and also, which is more like just, that's a supplement to Nomad Insurance, and remote health is just the possibility to talk to a doctor remotely, like virtually as well, anywhere in the world, and get prescriptions and referrals and that. Because that's developed in some countries, but not all. That's, yeah, anyway. And then the next is retirement, hopefully ready by end of the year or Q1 next year. So the possibility for an individual or remote worker to save for retirement, even if they move to different countries, keep saving to the same plan, or if they move employers. So yeah, so that's that. And then comes income protection after that, and then the membership. But snapshot today is, we have Nomad Insurance and remote health, ready. And as I mentioned, like 60,000 people using this, and that's has been met with great positivity. We have started this project Plumia, which is not the country and the internet itself, but it's like, we've started this project to research, develop how we want to do this, how we want to make the passport, what is the structure of a country and the internet. And, there is just gathered a bunch of volunteers, actually, who want to see this come to be. It's a very charismatic idea. And we have some incredible smart people, working and meeting weekly to create that. So that's sort of where we are with the passport, is that we're in the R&D phase, and it will take a bit to before we have a live passport. I think like at least a year or 2 or 3.
And what is it? What was the name of the volunteers? Is this the platform you're building it on, or kind of like understanding the logistics of how it ties together? What was that called again?
Oh, Plumia.
Plumia?
Plumia.
Okay, Plumia.
Plumia, yes. So
okay.
Plumia is the initiative we took to just say, like, we realized that it was useful to say publicly, like, hey, everyone, we're going to work on this. And that was indeed useful, because that meant that we sort of could, it's like turning on a lighthouse, and it would, like, people be like, oh, so that's one place we can go for doing that. And that has worked out that way. So we have been able to gather just incredibly smart people to help bring this about.
Awesome. So I can kind of see, based on what you're saying, how all of these pieces start to pull together. Then you have the retirement, and then it kind of goes into this big system, which it seems like you're working on now, of, okay, how do all these pieces work together? And to hear you say in just a couple of years, having this, this passport, this virtual digital passport of sorts, is really exciting, because that's not far off in the future. Um, so okay, so we've talked about this country on the internet, this global social safety, and I think that I can see that being, really good, not just for, you have the aspect of developing countries, but then digital nomads as well, and there's that gray area and really helping with that. Um, so let's shift into this idea of remote work. So I know you've obviously have this digital nomad lifestyle. You have remote companies. You've started remote companies. You've worked remotely. We've seen in this last year and a half with the pandemic, there's been this huge increase in remote work, which has been exciting. It's helped accelerate everything. So what do you think, just based on everything that's happened, this past year and what's coming up and, the big ambitions that you have as well. What do you see for the future of work and for the digital nomad lifestyle, what that looks like? And I know we've talked a bit about, what you're creating and how that impacts the digital nomad lifestyle. How do you see, the future of work evolving as we move forward?
Yeah, I mean, there are some different threads here, but I could say a couple that I find particularly interesting these days. So I would broadly bring up two. One is the sort of the new population distribution that we're seeing happening, and this is fascinating, and I really do love it. So there is this, great example here is the Umaya project in Belize, but there are several others like that, which is digital nomad or remote work villages or hamlets. And so what you see with as remote work is going more mainstream is that people are starting to realize, wait, we can move, and people move according to their preference, which is seeing like this absolutely boost in certain towns that some people prefer more than the big cities. You see the beach towns like Tulum absolutely explode. You also see some mountain towns like Tahoe absolutely explode, or Bansko, and in Bulgaria. And then, but here there's like so much more that's about to happen, so we can definitely see the possibility of more specialized villages being built and created. And there is this possibility now where, if people are awake, where there will be this resettlement period. It's kind of like when the car was invented, right? And suburbia started existing. Well, what does it mean when people can live anywhere? Because most people live in the city they're at because that's where their job is. So if they can move and they don't have to be concerned for their job, except like within a very broad range, with not, 10 time zones or something like that, maybe that's that. Well, that opens up a lot of opportunities. And, I think we will see online communities or friend groups or other networks build towns and cities. And, certainly, one crazy idea that we have been dreaming about in SafetyWing since the beginning is, we would love to create, get one of these Europe has full of these decaying castles, which are in these enormous park or forest properties. And they're so beautiful and nobody else wants them. And so we've been thinking like, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could like have like an HQ in one of these castles and then we could build like a little town around it, remote work town. Anyway, this is like a far out, a cute idea, but it illustrates what's possible. And so that's one thing, population distribution, opening up for new towns and a big resettlement where people will move according to their network preferences, their friends, families, how they want to live instead of where their job is. And so that's number one. That's like maybe the most interesting one. And it's a big effect. It's something that affects people's lives very directly. And then the other one I would say is the emergence of the remote company or virtual company that is good. So one thing that we notice very much at SafetyWing is, I mentioned we're 50, 60 people from 40 different countries. So when you have a company that spans that many places, you do need to build a bit more of a shared platform within the company, because you can remember like a regular company that exists in one particular town. Like if you're in a company in, New York, everyone who works in the company are New Yorkers, right? And everyone who they work in that set of norms and rules and language and everything. But if you're from 40 different countries, you have to build a shared kind of cultural platform. And so I think the remote companies that will succeed the most will do this really, really well. And that will be very interesting to see what will come out of that. But this need for sort of moral communities and shared frameworks to make communication and collaboration seamless is much larger in these organizations than previously.
Absolutely. And what does that look like for your companies and at SafetyWing? How do you manage that many people across the globe?
Well, I mean, for us, we're fortunate in the sense that, there is this like old adage I once heard that if you want peace in a relationship, you make sure you want the same thing, that you have the same goal. And that is certainly true and something we spend a lot of effort on. People who join SafetyWing usually want to bring this vision we've been talking about. They want to bring that about. And that is just, there's nothing that unifies like, being allies with a shared goal. That creates shared interests in a way that nothing else can. And then, of course, I think we probably emphasizes, our shared values much more, and they have to go one step deeper, I think, also. And for us, we have these 3 cultural values, which is, people make mistakes and that's okay. Improvements are always possible and all problems are solvable. And, we've built this basic plan about how to treat people into the company. And we make this FAQ about how to apply that in different situations. And that has succeeded to a great degree. I mean, it is actually a lovely place to work. And in some ways, it feels more cohesive than a regular company. So it is possible.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And when I became, a digital nomad years back, I remembered that I was meeting people from around the world, but we all just bonded so quickly and easily because we had this shared goal, shared vision of what the future of work was, and this value of working remotely and what that meant for us. And so it's so great and interesting to see how so many global people can come together with that shared goal, with that shared mission. And as you said, this is really literally changing the world in every way when we have people leaving cities and people are changing what their lifestyle looks like. And it's really shifting that. You talked about freedom, right? That freedom of choice of, am I going to go to a castle? Am I going to go, on the mountains or the beachside, and having that flexibility. And it's been exciting in the sense to see, I know COVID has kind of accelerated a lot of things, but this sweeping shift across the world, not just country by country, but, the whole world's been impacted by this. So right now, I know, I'm just outside of Toronto at the moment, and I've even seen it myself. People are leaving the cities, they're going to the suburbs, all of that. And it's been a bit interesting because we have people working remotely for the first time from home during the pandemic. And as you know, working from home during a pandemic is very different than the digital nomad lifestyle of just grabbing your laptop, traveling around the world. So what have you seen, or what's your take on some of the challenges that these new remote workers are facing when we talk about even if we look at mental health, stress, productivity? What have you seen has been the challenges with COVID, but then how is that going to change once we kind of exit this pandemic?
Well, we've seen a lot of people go through the same learning curve that everyone who starts to work remotely does, which is that everyone gets the first benefit for free, which is, no commute, And then they typically like working from home right away, but they haven't learned typically self-management, and they haven't built like there's like a lot of them did their social life associated with work. Now they had to find somewhere else to do that. Of course, and then when they were able to set up like the great home office, they were able to realize that, oh, I can actually meet my neighbors and friends. Then they did love it more, but it took a while, like for people to just work it out. And then of course you had the people who really took advantage of the possibilities of remote work, which would be the people who moved, the mentioned one. We had, like a couple of friends moved to Montana, one of a couple moved to bought this lake house, someone else moved to Tulum, and they're all like, for the people who took advantage to make the lifestyle choice that the remote work afforded them, they're like, well, if it's back to office for my job, that means I quit my job. That, like, all of them have that opinion because the lifestyle change they've made, they realized is like worth a tremendous amount to them. And some other people have moved, close to family as well. That's another, like, people have different preferences for what that freedom affords them. But yes, so that's, but nevertheless, back to like the early transition, what is the challenges? Well, yeah, self-management, creating your own office space or working environment. 3, social life, friends and neighbors, like outside of work, just because your colleagues are going to be far away. Those are a couple of big ones. And then when it comes to, mental health, and this is now a bit hard to disentangle from COVID, because I think remote work outside of COVID is like super beneficial also for mental health. But with COVID, that also meant often sitting inside and having a limited social life, which is known to be detrimental to mental health to a big extent. It has been so great to see in San Francisco how many people have started to go for like hikes and walks on the beach a lot. Like the number of like windsurfers down on Christie Beach is just gone from like 7 to like 300. It's bizarre. So a lot of people have started outdoor activities during COVID, and which is, so good for them. And, and I've done so as well. But other things, so yeah, so that's, building that outer habit, finding the social circle is two things. And then it's the like finding like, we see a lot of this is like Silicon Valley fads, but it's true, finding a contemplative practice, like increasing meditation and other things like that has been seen tremendous growth in that. And also a lot of people are using coaches more. In SafetyWing, we have this personal development budget that can be used for coaches, extremely popular. And of course, a coach can very easily be had remotely. That transfers extremely easily to remote. It's just as good. So yeah, I would say that's a good toolkit for great mental health. Get outside, get good friends, sign up for a coach, and make use of the freedom that remote work affords you.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point in that, when people are so new to it and they're thrown into this working from home, their mind is sort of work from home, that's it. And they're not very intentional about what that looks like because they've kind of been thrown into it. And so I think you shared some really great tips and points of, being intentional. You said, some people that intentionally moved to Tulum or, by the lake and really recognizing, wait, there's a lot of opportunity here. And, as much as, with the pandemic and the stress that causes and has caused and has impacted people in their mental health, I think as the pandemic ends and we see people where it's like, okay, they get to really be intentional with their social circle, being able to go and work from places where they want to and create a lifestyle where it's not just like your life revolves around work, but really finally creating that ideal lifestyle. And I kind of imagine that, not only will mental health improve, it will like significantly improve when we look at the baseline of the standard 9 to 5 and what people have been operating at. Um, yeah, that's awesome. And I like what you mentioned with meditation and all of those things that can just really support you, as a remote worker, and just really being intentional with it, and what you're doing with, making it work for you in a way that works best for you. So on the topic of unhealth, so SafetyWing, you are like, congratulations, by the way, because I know you've been a growing company over the years. I remember when you first came out, you're now one of the most popular insurance providers for remote workers, teams. You have Nomad Insurance, which is the travel and medical for digital nomads, the remote health insurance, which is the full on health insurance. So there's a few things I want to dive into here. So first of all, just for the newbies out there, this is going to be really basic for you. Can you explain the difference between travel insurance and health insurance for people?
Yeah. So Nomad Insurance, the situation where you buy that is you're going abroad. You want to have insurance, but there are like two kinds of insurances you kind of want. You want the medical part, and you want what is broadly known as the travel part, which includes a few different things. It's like if things get stolen, it's like liability if you like injure someone, because you're outside the structures like of your home country. So it's like this collection of insurances that covers all kinds of things when you're abroad. So, and that costs that's a monthly subscription that costs $40 a month outside the US. And you can kind of start it when you go out and pause it whenever, and that's it. And then remote health, the health insurance. So Nomad Insurance has a few exclusions. It's a lightweight medical product in that it does not cover pre-existing conditions. That's the big one. So it only covers anything like if you have an ongoing treatment program, for example. When you get Nomad Insurance, you can't use Nomad Insurance to like continue the treatment program. It only covers things that start after you start the insurance, if that makes sense. And that difference between covering changes the price a lot. So remote health is more like a fully fledged health insurance, the kind of thing that you would have like as a benefit in a big company. That's like how it was made. So it costs more. It costs between like, 80 to 150, depending on things. And you can also add in some add-ons like dental and maternity and some things. So that can be bought as an individuals, but most commonly what that is bought for teams. So remote health, that makes it possible for a startup or a company to get benefits and offer the same package where they have a dashboard. Then they can add like, oh, I have this employee here in Italy and have this other one in Argentina, and they get on the same plan. And they can also move. So it's a borderless health insurance, which makes it, more attractive for a remote worker, because that means that if they go for a long trip abroad, they can just keep the same insurance and have that safety and stability.
I can imagine this is huge even for, a lot of Americans. I know when they were traveling, they had to have their health. It's also confusing, especially when you're traveling. And like you said, with SafetyWing, it just puts it all together, and you don't have to worry about employees from different countries. Just simplifies it all. Let's also talk about, because I think this is really important. I see a lot of people, not a lot, but there's a good amount of people that will travel without travel insurance, and they take that risk. But that's a huge risk to take. I'm a huge advocate, always get travel insurance. So let's talk about just how important it is to have that travel insurance, especially when you're traveling around.
Yeah. And this I can totally relate to, because, I mentioned that I was, I needed this myself. So I was a nomad, and I was actually one of those people. I would have travel insurance, but I would let it time out because it only worked for like up to 4 to 5 days for the one particular one I had. So I would typically go home and restart it. That was kind of how I got my insurance, which is not ideal, but that was kind of what I knew about what was available at the time. And I did have this situation where I had to go to a clinic in the US for a tiny thing. And it was just like, I just took some tests and then came the bill back and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so broke. And that was a real awakener. And it could have been so much worse as well, I realized, because I only took some tests, but it turns out they're super expensive. And I had a friend who had a different kind of thing, which was that in his rental car, he came to a crossing and this bicyclist came across and he sort of hit the wheel of the bicyclist. And that was a liability thing. So, and the point is, when you're abroad, these things can happen. And, you can, and my plan was, oh, if I get ill, I'm just going to go home. That's not an option. I realized as I was like having this chest pain, which was the thing. And I was like, what, I'm going to fly home now, like book a ticket with this chest pain. That's not the situation. I need to go to a clinic right now. Like, this is the situation. I need to go to a hospital, which was of course so short-sighted of me. But, to be covered so that you're not like in severe health risk or super broke or worse, you instead have Nomad Insurance, which is travel medical, which takes away that, and it also takes away that risk, because it is a risk and it is a worry. And by taking away that worry, you can, I think, live a more relaxed life. So I certainly have noticed that with me. So yeah, that's the reason to it's like a gift to your future self when you need it the most.
Yeah. And these things just, they're not planned, right? No one plans to have an accident or whatever it is. And you mentioned a good point about America in that, countries are so different in terms of how they operate, in terms of prices. So America is obviously very expensive, where somewhere else may be more affordable. But then you also have countries where they're not going to touch you or even help you until something's paid. Whereas, like I know in Canada, we'll get taken care of. It's all good. But when you're abroad, it's a different story. It's like no money in hand before anyone touches you. And it's so different. And so to have that protection, at least knowing, okay, no matter what, no matter how these countries operate, I know I'll be okay. And like you said, once you're in a situation, you're not always in a state where you can just fly home, especially if you have, some sort of accident. And again, I think of what comes to mind is Bali. So I lived there for a bit and there was so many scooter accidents and people just, not having the right coverage for that. And no one expects it. And it happens all the time. And it just, there's so many ways that those situations could have been mitigated and not, not so intense or expensive or stressful. So yes, definitely very, very important. So upcoming, so we've talked about insurance, but you also have some really exciting things that I noticed as well. You now have COVID-19 coverage, and you also have, which you touched on before, remote doctor, which is coming soon too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the COVID-19 coverage, that was actually, so we updated that during COVID, and we're still actually one of the few providers that covers both quarantines and also COVID itself. This seems strange, but you might find that like most travel medical, they have an exclusion for that. So we updated the policy. That was back in last August, and that has, helped us grow a tremendous amount, I should add, because of course this is like one of the main considerations people have. So we added in COVID-19 coverage in August, and then last month we also added in this quarantine coverage in particular, which is that sometimes you're mandated to do quarantine at a hotel, and it would sort of cover that quarantine. So that's just keeping the insurance updated for what's relevant.
No, that's incredible. I think that the way that you're doing things is so just, it's so innovative and cutting edge. And you think of insurance companies as these very old school traditional models, but you're doing it in such a new way. And really, again, with the COVID, a lot of insurance companies are sort of I don't want to be, liable or responsible for anything. And you're really just like embracing these changes and adapting so quickly to have that offered, throughout the pandemic is incredible. So if people want to sign up for SafetyWing for travel medical, is it just as simple as going to the site, filling out some information? What's the process like for people to join?
Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculously easy. You go to the website and sign up, and then the insurance is live, and it takes 2 to 5 minutes depending on how fast you write, and you can do that before you go, or like on the way, or when you're abroad. So that's really flexible.
Awesome. And Sondre, so just as we wrap up, where can everybody find more information about you, SafetyWing? What's the best place for people to go?
So I, go to safetywing.com for sure to check out the website. We also have, some cool tools that we really would encourage listeners of this podcast to check out. We have borderless. You can find it on the tools borderless.safetywing.com, which shows all the travel restrictions and vaccine information in every country in an up-to-date way. We have this team who kind of researches and updates everything several times a week, which is great. We have buildingremotely.com, which is like a podcast and a tool for people who want to build remote companies, which I'm sure also some people listening to this podcast might consider.
Amazing. Awesome. So I'll link to all of that below. Sondre, it has been so exciting chatting with you today and just really hearing how you're, driving this huge change and transformation in terms of the future of work and, having this country on the internet, this global, social safety net. This is really transforming so many things across the world, and I'm so excited to see this all pan out. And I can see that you're very fast moving with a lot of things, so I'm excited to see this, the passport come out in a few years and just see everything that pans out. And I just really thank you for coming on today and sharing that with our listeners.
Thank you, Kate. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Sondre. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Remote Nomad podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other streaming services so you don't miss an episode. Share this episode with a friend so they too can learn how to create more freedom. And show your support by leaving us a review so we can reach even more people who are passionate about the remote work movement. In the meantime, you can find me over on Instagram at The Remote Nomad, where I share more tips and insights into landing a remote job. That's it for today. I'm your host and remote career coach, Kate Smith. Thanks for listening.